My name is Nana Hardman, 28 years old. I always imagined my wedding day would be the one moment in my life untouched by the chaos of my family. For once, I wanted a day that was about love, celebration, and safety, something simple and glowing. And for a while, it felt exactly like that. The morning sun softened everything it touched. Victor kept squeezing my hand as if he couldn't believe I was real, and every detail looked like a scene from a dream I had as a little girl. If there was one thing I didn't prepare for, though, it was my brother, Chase. Chase, 24, magnetic, loud, impossible to ignore. The kind of guy who doesn't need the spotlight because he drags it to himself wherever he goes. Growing up, I used to think he was merely enthusiastic. With time, I learned it was closer to need, a hunger to be noticed. But I convinced myself he could set that aside for one day, my day. For the first couple of hours, he seemed to. He played the perfect little brother, laughing with guests and posing for photos with Adrian, who, like always, stood beside him with that soft, patient smile she seemed to reserve for the people she loved most. I should have known it wouldn't last. When Chase stood up during the toasts, glass raised and grin wide, a few guests clapped. I felt my stomach tighten, but I tried to ignore the warning bells. Victor brushed his thumb across my knuckles, reassuring, warm. "Give him a chance," he mouthed. So I did. Chase started strong, shockingly strong. He called Victor the best thing that ever happened to me, joked about how I wouldn't stop talking about him, even said the wedding looked classy enough to be in a movie. People laughed. Someone behind me cheered. For a moment, I relaxed. Maybe, I thought, he's actually trying. Then something in his expression shifted, barely noticeable, but sharp enough to cut through my hope. "And speaking of movies," he said, "let me tell you all a little story from our childhood." That was the moment the air changed. Victor stiffened. Adrian glanced up at Chase, a tiny crease forming between her eyebrows. At first, what he said was harmless, technically true. I did live with our grandparents when he was born, but then he pushed further and further. And then the lies began to spill out so confidently that people around us started exchanging uneasy looks. He said I abandoned the family, that I never wanted to be part of the household, that I left him, poor little Chase, to deal with our parents alone. He joked that my parents shipped me off because they couldn't handle me, painting me as some kind of wild, spoiled brat, a problem they solved by dumping me next door. None of that was true. But the worst part? He told the story with such casual charm, such performative sadness, that the room started to believe him. A ripple of discomfort moved through the tables. People whispered. A few looked at me with pity, and somehow that felt even worse. Adrian stared at him in horror. Victor's jaw clenched so tightly I thought he might stand up and interrupt, but I squeezed his hand and shook my head. My throat was closing. I didn't trust my own voice. Chase wasn't done. He kept escalating, laughing as he painted me as selfish, cold, entitled. "Well," he said, shrugging dramatically, "what can you really expect from someone who was raised like a princess while the rest of us dealt with reality?" He ended the whole thing with a self-satisfied smirk, lifting his glass as if he had just blessed the evening with his brilliance. It felt like he had dropped a stone into the center of my wedding, and the ripples were swallowing everything. Victor whispered, "Nana, I'm here. I've got you." But his voice couldn't reach the part of me that had curled inward and gone quiet. The reception never recovered after that. People looked confused, hesitant. Some avoided my gaze entirely, unsure if they'd just witnessed a joke, a confession, or a character assassination. And the worst part? Chase looked proud of himself. The next morning, while I was still trying to process everything, I woke up to a message from him. "Relax, it was a joke, a wedding prank. Lighten up." A prank. Humiliating me in front of every person important to me. Apparently that was comedy. I didn't answer. Later, Adrian called me. Her voice was trembling, equal parts angry and devastated. "Nana, please tell me you knew about this. Please tell me he didn't go up there and say all of that on purpose." I told her the truth. I had no idea. I never would have agreed to something like that. She broke down crying. She told me she didn't know whether she could marry someone who thought humiliating people, especially family, counted as humor. That was the moment I realized the damage wasn't limited to my wedding. Chase's actions were about to cost him the woman he loved. And somehow, in his mind, that was my fault. Hours later, Chase called me again, and again, and again, and when I didn't pick up, he sent a message that made my blood run cold. "I need you to tell Adrian it was planned. Tell her you were in on it. Say it was all part of the joke." He wanted me to lie, to save him, to protect him from the consequences of a moment he chose, deliberately, to destroy my happiness. I stared at the message, numb, and all I could think was, he ruined my wedding, and now he expects me to rescue him. I've replayed Chase's wedding speech in my mind more times than I care to admit, not because I wanted to, because some wounds don't stay quiet. They echo. His words didn't come out of nowhere. They came from a story he believed his whole life. A story that wasn't mine, yet somehow became my identity in his eyes. But none of it started at the wedding. It started long, long before. Growing up, our house was small. Too small, according to my parents. When my mom became pregnant with Chase, they told me with excited smiles that I would get a new adventure, that I'd live with Grandma and Grandpa just for a little while. I was 5. I didn't know what temporary meant. I didn't know I should ask how long. I just remember holding a stuffed rabbit as my dad drove me 2 streets over, saying things like, "You'll love it there," and "It's only until we get things sorted." But they never got anything sorted. They never tried. My grandparents weren't bad people, but they weren't warm people either. They believed children should be seen, not heard. They fed me, clothed me, made sure I went to school. But affection, comfort, hugs, I don't remember a single one. The worst part wasn't living there. The worst part was feeling like I'd been quietly erased. At first, I'd walk over to my parents' house every afternoon. I'd knock on the door with this stupid hope that today would be different. Maybe today they'd invite me in. Maybe we'd play a board game. Maybe they'd ask me how school was. Most days I'd get, "Oh, honey, we're busy right now. Maybe tomorrow. Grandma must be waiting for you." And then the door would close. When Chase was born, everything shifted completely. Suddenly there were baby photos everywhere, visitors coming in and out, my parents smiling wider than I'd ever seen. I remember standing outside one day, watching through the window as my mom kissed Chase's forehead. No one had looked at me like that in a very long time. When I was 7, I realized something heartbreaking. No one was going to ask me to come home. I kept going over, less and less, until eventually I stopped knocking altogether. It wasn't a dramatic decision. It was a quiet surrender, a child finally understanding where she did and didn't belong. Meanwhile, Chase grew up believing he was the center of the universe. Our parents adored him. He was praised for everything. His drawings were masterpieces. His tantrums were cute. His smallest achievements were celebrated. And because no one bothered explaining why I wasn't there, he filled in the blanks himself. Somewhere along the way, he decided I had abandoned him, that I didn't want to be his sister, that I chose to stay away. The lies he told at my wedding weren't random. They were memories he had molded into a narrative that made sense to him. To him, I wasn't someone pushed aside. I was someone who walked away. As we grew older, our paths stayed separate. He became the golden child, the charming one, the one our parents boasted about at neighborhood gatherings. I was the ghost, visible only when convenient, a prop they dusted off when someone asked, "Don't you have a daughter too?" Our sibling relationship, if you could call it that, consisted mostly of awkward small talk. Chase occasionally acted like we were close, usually in front of other people, when it made him look good. But he never asked real questions, never wondered if I was okay, never cared why I kept my distance. He just accepted the version of me our parents offered him, the difficult child, the selfish one, the girl who preferred living next door. So when he humiliated me at the wedding, twisting our childhood into some absurd comedy sketch, it wasn't random cruelty. It was the same story he'd been telling himself and others for years. He simply put a microphone to it. I thought that would be the end of it, that I could block his number, breathe, and move on. But Chase's desperation didn't fade. It intensified. The more Adrian pulled away from him, the more frantic he became to rewrite the wedding disaster. And when I refused to lie to her, he did what he always did. He blamed me. "You're ruining my life," he texted. "You've always hated me. You could fix this if you wanted. You just don't care." The words hit harder than they should have, because for a moment I heard echoes of the little girl inside me, the one who always wondered why I wasn't enough. But nothing prepared me for what happened next. Victor and I had barely settled into our honeymoon when my phone buzzed, with a number I didn't recognize. I thought it was Chase again, using another burner contact. But when I answered, I heard 2 voices I hadn't expected to hear at all. My parents. They hadn't called to congratulate us. They hadn't apologized for skipping our wedding entirely. They hadn't asked if we arrived safely. Their message was simple: fix your brother's engagement. My mother's voice was sharp, frantic. Nana, you need to talk to Adrian. Tell her you were in on the prank. Chase is devastated. As his sister, it's your job to help him. My father chimed in. You're the eldest. Start acting like it. Just like that, all the years of neglect, distance, and silence evaporated because Chase needed me. Not because they missed me. Not because they cared. Because they wanted something. My grip tightened around the phone. I felt Victor watching me from across the room, concerned, but I couldn't meet his eyes. Not yet. My parents kept talking over each other, pushing, demanding, twisting the guilt knife deeper. And something inside me finally broke. I listened, numb, until the moment I couldn't anymore. You want me to act like his sister now? I said quietly. Where was that energy when I was 5, or 7, or 10, when you shoved me out of the house and forgot I existed? There was a stunned silence on the line, but it didn't matter. I wasn't done. You made your choices. Now deal with them. I'm not fixing this. Not for him, not for you, not anymore. I hung up before they could respond. It was the first time in my life I had ever chosen myself over them, but I had no idea that the fallout from that call was only the beginning. After I hung up on my parents, I just sat there on the edge of the hotel bed, staring at my phone like it might start ringing again out of spite. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from something I had never allowed myself to feel toward them before. Anger, real, burning, decade-old anger. Victor walked over quietly and sat beside me. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't have to. His hand found my back, warm and steady. What did they say? He asked gently. I swallowed hard. They want me to fix Chase's breakup. That's the only reason they called. Victor's jaw clenched. Of course it is. A part of me wanted to collapse into his arms and cry. Another part of me felt strangely numb, like my emotions were sitting just out of reach. My parents hadn't even bothered to show up to our wedding. They'd barely acknowledged my existence for years. Now, suddenly, I mattered. Because Chase needed damage control. Not because they loved me, because I was useful. I turned my phone off and set it on the nightstand. We came here to relax, I whispered, almost apologizing. Victor squeezed my hand. You don't need to apologize for their behavior. But even with Victor's reassurance, the peace I had hoped for on this honeymoon crumbled. No matter how many times I silenced my phone, Chase found new numbers, new accounts, new ways to push through. 12 unknown callers per day, mutual friends sending messages I never asked for, screenshots of Chase's posts online, long, rambling paragraphs where he painted himself as the victim and me as the bitter, jealous sister out to destroy his happiness. It was exhausting. One night, I woke up to my phone buzzing across the table at 2:13 a.m. Even though it was on silent, the vibration shook the wood loud enough to jolt me awake. I lunged for it, half asleep, praying it was some random spammer. But no, Chase. Again. Even blocked, he had found another number. The message preview read, Are you happy now? Adrian won't talk to me. This is your fault. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. The words already scraped across my chest like claws. Victor stirred beside me. Is it him again? I nodded. He reached over and took the phone from my hands. I'm putting this in the drawer. When he tucked the phone away, it felt like he'd just locked a snake in a box. But the damage had already seeped into me. By morning, the stress had settled into my bones like cold water. And then came Adrian's message. Hi, Nana. I'm sorry to bother you while you're away. I don't know what to do anymore. I stared at the screen, reading it over and over. My first instinct was sympathy. Adrian was kind. She had always been kind. She didn't deserve the chaos Chase dragged behind him like a shadow. But another part of me tightened, protective. Hadn't I endured enough? Still, I answered. It's okay. What's going on? Her reply came fast, like she had been waiting for someone, anyone, to listen. He keeps apologizing, over and over, promising he'll change. I don't know what to believe. Can I ask, do you think he regrets what he did, truly? My chest ached, because I could hear her heart breaking through every letter. But I could also feel myself slipping back into the exact place I'd spent years fighting to escape. The mediator, the fixer, the forgotten sibling who smooths things over so other people don't feel uncomfortable. I took a breath. Adrian, I don't think I'm the right person to give you advice on this. I'm already overwhelmed, and I need to stay out of it. There was a pause. I imagined her wiping away tears, trying to be polite even while unraveling. I understand. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to put you in the middle. But she already had. Everyone had. The next morning, she messaged again. I met with him today. He cried, Nana. He said he knows he messed up. He said he wants to be better. I don't know if I believe him yet, but I'm giving him a chance to prove it. Slowly. Part of me wanted to support her. Another part wanted to scream a warning. But I stayed neutral. Distance is a skill, and I was finally learning it. Then the message came that I wasn't expecting. From Chase. He wrote, I want to talk. In person. I know I messed up. I won't pressure you. I want to explain. Please, if at any moment you feel uncomfortable, you can leave and I won't bother you again. I promise. I stared at the words so long the screen dimmed. For all my frustration, exhaustion, and anger, something inside me softened. Not out of forgiveness, but fatigue. I was tired, so tired of carrying the weight of this story alone. Maybe hearing him out would help me finally let it go. Victor watched me reading the message. What does he want now? He wants to meet, I whispered. He says it's on my terms. Victor's eyes softened, but a protective edge lingered. You don't owe him anything. Not after everything he's done. I know, I said, and I meant it. But I also knew closure never comes by accident. Sometimes it has to be chosen. I think I want to hear what he has to say. Victor nodded slowly. If you go, I'm going with you, or I'll wait nearby. I smiled weakly. I know. And for the first time in weeks, the tightness in my chest loosened just enough for me to breathe. I wasn't going to fix Chase. I wasn't going to fix my parents. But maybe, just maybe, I could fix myself. And that started with the truth, even if it hurt. I met Chase on a cool, gray afternoon, the kind where the sky looks like it's holding its breath. He suggested a cafe downtown, one with big windows and quiet corners. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting alone at a small table by the window, hands clasped like he was afraid they might shake. For a moment, I just watched him through the glass. He wasn't performing, he wasn't smiling, he wasn't trying to charm anyone. He looked small, and I realized I had never seen him that way before. When I stepped inside, he stood up immediately. Nana, he said, voice low, almost timid. Thanks for coming. I nodded, but didn't sit right away. I needed a second to absorb the moment, the vulnerability, the unfamiliar heaviness in his posture. Eventually, I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. There was a long silence before he spoke. I'm sorry, he finally whispered. 2 simple words, but they hit the air with the weight of a lifetime. He didn't rush, he didn't deflect, he didn't laugh it off like he usually did. He looked me in the eye, and for the first time, I saw something raw behind his bravado. Fear, shame, regret, all tangled into one. I messed up, he continued. At your wedding. I don't know what I was thinking. I guess I wasn't thinking at all. He paused, swallowing hard. I wanted people to laugh. I thought people would find it funny. And then it just kept going, and I couldn't stop. And then he dragged a hand down his face. I destroyed everything. I didn't interrupt him. I let him speak. It was the first time he had ever owned anything without twisting it into a joke. And Adrian? His voice broke just slightly. She told me she's willing to try again, but only if I prove I can change. Not with words, with actions. I nodded carefully. That's fair. He looked down at the table. I know. Another long pause. Then he looked up and said something I wasn't expecting. My whole life, I thought you didn't want anything to do with me. My breath stilled. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands clasped together like he was bracing himself. I thought you didn't like me. I thought you left because I was born. No one ever explained why you went to live with Grandma and Grandpa. Mom said you just preferred it. Dad said you liked your space. He laughed once, but it wasn't funny. It was brittle. I filled in the blanks. I told myself you didn't want me. My heart tightened under my ribs. Now it made sense. The twisted wedding speech, the resentment, the tone he used whenever he talked about our childhood. None of it came from logic. It came from a wound no one had ever bothered to clean. Chase, I said gently, I never chose to leave. I was 5. They told me it was temporary. Then it wasn't, and they never brought me home. He looked stunned, like I had just told him the sky was green. What? He whispered. So I told him everything. The nights I waited by the door, the cold dinners at my grandparents' table, the visits that ended with the door shutting in my face, the loneliness I learned to bury because no one wanted to see it. I didn't sugarcoat anything, but I didn't use my words as weapons either. I spoke the truth, not to hurt him, but to free us both from the lies we'd inherited. When I finished, Chase's eyes were glassy, his face pale. "They never told me," he said, "not once." I nodded. "I figured." He sat back in his chair, stunned. "All this time, you weren't trying to stay away. You weren't rejecting us. Or me." "No," I said softly. "I was trying to survive the only way I knew how." He rubbed his hands over his face again. "God, I've been angry at you for so long. I thought you didn't want a brother." I let the silence settle before saying the words I had held inside for years. "Chase, I wanted a family." He flinched, not dramatically, but like something inside him had shifted, broken open. For a moment, we both sat quietly, two adults unpacking a childhood that neither of us fully understood at the time. Then Chase straightened a little. "Do you think," he began carefully, "we could try to be siblings now? Like, start over?" I felt the question settle between us like a fragile thing. And here's the truth I finally admitted to myself in that moment. I didn't want to rebuild something that never really existed. I didn't want to pretend we had a bond we didn't grow up with, or force something out of obligation. I didn't hate him. I didn't blame him. I just didn't have the energy to invest in a relationship that had never been given a chance to form. So I answered honestly, "Chase, I don't think I want a close relationship. I'm not angry. I just don't feel like your sister. Not in the way siblings normally do. We didn't grow up together. We don't have shared memories, and I'm tired of trying to force myself into a role I was never allowed to have." His expression fell, but he didn't argue. He didn't beg. He didn't guilt-trip me. He just nodded. "I get it," he whispered. "I wish things had been different." "Me too." Another quiet moment, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was acceptance. "I don't mind staying in touch," I added, "being respectful, checking in sometimes, but I can't build a whole relationship out of nothing." "That's fair," he said quickly. "Really, I respect that." When we finally stood, he surprised me. He didn't hug me. He didn't try to. He simply said, "Thank you for telling me the truth." And for once, I believed he meant it. As I walked outside, Victor was waiting across the street, leaning against the car. His face relaxed when he saw me, and I felt something warm settle into my chest. Peace, maybe for the first time in years. I wasn't responsible for fixing my parents' choices. I wasn't responsible for Chase's mistakes. I wasn't responsible for anyone's healing but my own. And for the first time, that felt like freedom.